Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of Wake the Future. Erica and Jared here. And today we're really going to focus on what we call musical chairs. And really what we're going to be digging into is everything around AI, jobs, skills, future of work, and putting it within this context of musical chairs, which Jared thought of. So maybe you want to kick us off and even describe your thinking behind why you are framing it this way.
Here's why we're calling this musical chairs. When we talk about all of this technology, this artificial intelligence, and where it's going, and specifically where it's going when it comes to impacting people's jobs. You have, and we're going to talk about some of this today. You have all of this conversation, sometimes debate, about is it going to enhance people's jobs and make them more efficient? Is it going to eliminate people's jobs? Mm-hmm. Is there a gray area in between, which is kind of the short answer, yes, at least for the time being. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to be seeing what I think of as a game of musical chairs. And why do I say that? You have X amount of chairs, and those represent jobs. Those represent jobs as we think about them conventionally. And let's say for simplicity's sake, there are 20 chairs right now. It could be 20 million or 20 billion. It doesn't matter, but 20 chairs right now. And over the course of time, the music's going to play. And then when the music stops, there are going to be 19 chairs and then 18 chairs. Now, I don't think eventually that's going to go down to zero. I don't think we're heading to a place where no one's going to be employed. But I do think in the short and medium term, this is going to be unlike any technological revolution that we've seen, certainly in our lifetimes. Everyone talks about how this is just the technology revolution of today, just like the internet was, and computing and all of that. And I differentiate this for a variety of reasons. I think what we're seeing today and what many of you are probably thinking about or maybe worried about is different because the internet, fundamentally, it is a public utility, a public good that ultimately almost everyone on the planet, not quite, has access to. A general purpose technology, which in theory, yes, I think did enhance most people's lives in a variety of ways. Those have been well cataloged. This is very different because I think artificial intelligence, it's too early to tell based on where you think this is going. Is this going to be a utility? Is this going to be something that ultimately replaces people, or is it going to be both? And so here we go. We start with this game of musical chairs. And if we stop the clock where we are today, there are a certain amount of chairs on the dance floor. And then at a certain point in time, a chair is going to get pulled and another chair is going to get pulled. And the question is, how do people think about that? How do they respond to that? How do they adapt to that so that they can be best prepared and their kids can be best prepared for this?
Right. So, and you're absolutely right. And this is always how I think about it and I frame it. Like, it's not just another link in a sequence. And I think it is completely wrong thinking for anybody out there who's positing this narrative, right? That it is just going to be the next iteration of that. We've seen job displacement before. We've seen changes in the economy before. We've seen jobs being lost and new jobs being created before. And we've seen these economic cycles kind of rinse, repeat. You throw a new technology in there that's wholly disruptive, like the internet, right? And it caused all of these ripple effects. But this time is different. This time is a sea change. And I think that is leading to a lot of confusion. You and I talk about this, and I cite this statistic all the time. And I'm always honest about the fact that, talk about WTF moments, right? It's like, what the F does this actually mean when the World Economic Forum comes out and says that there will be a net positive in jobs, right? If 92 million of them are going to be displaced by AI, and this is by 2030. So we're thinking, 4 years from now, but 170 million new ones are going to be created. So what is that? A net positive of 78 million jobs. The question that nobody can seem to answer thoroughly enough is in what? How? Who exactly is going to be displaced? Right? There's the other statistic layered on top of that 73% of enterprise Gen AI solutions right now fail. So basically, when generative AI is plugged into a workplace or any sort of organization, because there is no long-term thinking about it, there is no understanding about how it's going to impact jobs, no understanding about the impact it's going to have on work, no idea as to how it's going to affect human talent. And it's no wonder that a lot of this falls flat. And you even remember when I was sitting and writing my book and you were editing it and you're like, you have a laundry list of statistics, right, coming out of the big accounting firms, the big consulting firms, the big prestigious universities. And you're like, if you actually pull the layers back, these are uh, wholly inconsistent.
Right.
You're like,
Right.
what's coming out of MIT, Stanford, McKinsey,
I mean,
Deloitte,
look,
like none of them. So there's no consensus on any of this.
I don't buy, no matter how credible the source, I don't fully buy any of the data points that are predictions about this right now.
No,
because
we have
not
no
only do
idea.
they all contradict each other, but you have to think about who's sponsoring the research, who benefits from putting the results out. Is it someone who benefits from putting out this narrative of mass automation? Is it someone who benefits from a narrative of humans are still going to be right at the center of everything? There are self-interested parties when you think about looking at all of this research and data. I actually don't think, it's sort of like with crypto and Bitcoin. The smartest people out there all disagree. There's not a consensus on where this is all going. When I see that, it generally tells me that no one can really get a handle on this. So listen, I'm making an appeal to all of you right now. If you see anyone in your sphere of influence, people whose content you consume, people you listen to, you trust, act like they know for sure where all of this is going, they either are way too overconfident or they're just lying, because the fact is we don't know. The bottom line is that the majority of people out there, including us, we didn't know of ChatGPT or any of Claude or any of these other tools before about 2 years ago. Never heard of them. Didn't know about them. Now, I would argue that they are the extension of a lot of technology that was already being put in the marketplace. We just gave it different vocabulary. All of these digital and virtual assistants and all of these, now we call it agentic AI, but all of these tools that are there to help us using algorithms to make decisions for us. I would argue that what we're utilizing today is just the next iteration of that, just on steroids. Now, if you actually do believe where some people think this technology is going, then understand that we are only 1% to 2% of the way down this path of artificial intelligence right now. This is not something that's just going to develop into something tomorrow. It's going to look a certain way, and that's going to be it.
Well, so also, right, and we've said this in prior episodes, right? The pace of change is not consistent in all areas, and the pace of change is wholly uneven. Right. So I have been asked the question before, which is kind of an interesting question, right? It's like, if you view this as a baseball game, what inning are we currently in? Oh. And it's like, who are you answering it for? So it's like, you have tech startups. You have ones that can be very nimble, very agile. A lot of these companies that employ, 5-10 people max. Yep. We see the rise of solopreneurs who employ nobody because they're a company of one, and all of their departments, right, are AI.
That's right.
They're in a very different inning than traditional incumbents. They're in a totally different inning than most of the companies that probably all of you work for, right? It's like all of those, like in the knowledge economy, traditional white collar jobs, even a lot in like the manufacturing sector, they might be 1 or 2 innings in. Yeah. So it's like we're only a few percentage points in. It's like, to whom? To who, right? Because it's it's still totally relative. Uneven.
So like, I love that analogy. As a sports fan, I eat that up. But here's the thing. I think the difference is, like, if you're advanced on this curve right now, you're in the bottom of the first inning. And if you're not advanced, you're in the top of the first inning. I don't think anyone is in the second, third, or fourth inning here. This game is going to go on for a very, very long time. And to some of you, depending on where you lean on this, that can, like a lot of things we talk about, can either be really exciting or really terrifying. We talk about bringing common sense to uncommon times. So I want to frame this conversation a few different ways. I was with a client of ours not that long ago. Yeah. And this is not the only time I've heard this from someone who I trust, kind of in conversation about where's this all going. And the client gave me an interesting anecdote. What they said was, almost everyone in our office, these are knowledge workers. These are people who sit at desks supporting a more industrial business. And someone gave me a little insight and said, almost everyone in the office basically has these AI tools up all the time. And it's almost like a badge of honor to be utilizing these technologies to do a significant percentage of their work, because it shows that they're up to speed on all of these tools. Now, I think about this, my first instinct is, I remember in the 90s and in the early 2000s when everyone was putting on their resume, I'm really proficient at Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and all other Microsoft Office applications. And that was considered an advantage when someone was hiring you. It's
that was like a flex.
I can do a PowerPoint. It's like a flex. Now it's like my kid can do all of this stuff in his sleep. So It's really interesting. So, but I don't think it's the same now. So when people are flexing about the fact that they're using these tools
Mm-hmm.
to enhance or augment all their work, yeah, that gets you to a certain point in the near term. Maybe it says, okay, I'm tech forward, I belong here, I understand how to integrate these tools into my job. But ultimately, where does that curve kind of get over here and then jump off a cliff where a manager, a CEO, whoever it is evaluating their people and saying, well, you've been bragging for the last year about how you use ChatGPT to help you or basically do most of
Yeah.
your work on 80% of your tasks. You are now redundant. And that is the core principle of something like musical chairs, which suggests that while the music is playing,
Mm-hmm.
you might think you're in the flow and you might be well prepared for what's happening right now. But what about what happens tomorrow when all of a sudden that line moves or a chair is pulled? Are you going to be the first chair pulled? And if that chair is pulled, is it going to be because you don't use the technology enough or because you've proven that in using it so much, your human skills that existed previously are not necessary for that particular job? And of course, if that's the
Mm-hmm.
case, we're going to get to this in this conversation. What do you have to do then to assure yourself that you are going to remain just as relevant and necessary in the future?
So there's so many parts of this to unpack, and I view you mention it as a curve, and I see it as kind of three intertwined spirals. So it's like you have the spiral of just this massive hype cycle,
Yeah.
right? It's like hype spiral where it's just like we're so inundated by all of these new tools, new, right? I always talk about AI as a prefix. It's like AI marketed, AI driven, AI powered, AI. Ugh. If it's slapped on as a prefix to everything, it means absolutely nothing, right? And then you have the reality strand, which is, and I've said this before, right? It's like we have to be equally interested in what AI can do and what AI cannot do right now, cannot do in 5 years, cannot do in 10. And you keep pushing that timeline out. And there are some very real great applications. And then there is some complete BS that's out there.
Yeah.
So then there's the reality strand. Then it's like your own expectations of your own worth, right? It's like what you think you need to be doing to get up on like both of these spirals. Now, what we're starting to see, and I think this is one of the pain points, and we'll start digging into there are a lot of work and personal pain points that are emerging from this,
Yeah.
which it's like when value and worth and purpose and technology all start becoming disconnected from each other, then it's like we're in this weird interstitial space where we're like, where do we move? Like
Right,
when
exactly.
the needle is moving in multiple directions at once.
Yeah, and I think about the perception of this. I mean, think about any of you that have kids. You know, there's a lot of conversation about how many of these tools are already being used and how should they be used when kids are completing assignments or projects or papers for school. And is it considered an advantage if a kid is heavily relying on these tools? Does that signify that the kid understands the technology that he or she has at their disposal and is becoming effectively more efficient in preparation for a new economy? Or does it signify laziness and they're not actually going through the critical thinking they need to do to complete conventional tasks at school? Now, we can make judgments about that, but bring that forward to the workplace. Now you're getting paid to do a job. Is the flex, again, that I rely heavily on these tools, thus I am contemporary? Or does it become I rely too much on these tools, ultimately I'm not bringing the human value adds that really matter for you to pay me the salary you're paying me? Now, here's where this differentiates from the past. These conversations, to a certain extent, have been happening for decades, generations, when it comes to the industrial workforce, blue collar, quote, positions, manufacturing, robots producing things on an assembly line and displacing a lot of the people. So there are sectors of the economy. You go to small towns in this country and you see the disruption that robotics and automation have had for decades on different industries. So this is not entirely new. The reason why this particular time is different is because you're talking about the replacing or displacement of white collar jobs, of knowledge economy jobs. And when we consult with people at companies, I think it becomes very easy to think about a problem as belonging to someone else, because you're in your leadership role or your office job and you're just talking about little cogs on a board. Okay, well, it's unfortunate we're going to have to let a lot of these people go, but you know what? We're going to be more efficient because we're going to deploy robots. What happens when it comes for your job?
You talk about education and you talk about work, And the same problem is true of both, which is we're having the wrong conversations about all of these things.
Yeah.
Not us at this very moment.
No, but
like
yeah.
in these two institutions, right? So in education, it's focused on cheating. It's focused on like, instead of maybe just going back to the drawing board and saying maybe your role as a teacher or a guide is in completely redesigning the assignments so that they are AI proofable.
Right, exactly.
That you can actually use AI. And it's like, we have such a blank canvas for redesign and reimagination, but we're still stuck in these same loops. So the second part of this is humans in the loop. It's like, how do we keep humans in the loop? And I think the question in the future, and this is what I was reading, I was like, oh my God, this is such a great reframing of this, which is what happens when humans are the loop? It's not humans in the loop. Redesign the freaking loop so that humans in and of themselves are their own feedback loop. But we can't get from A to B because we're still struggling with how to get from A to B. Without even thinking, how do we get from B to Z and leapfrog every other letter that comes in between?
And again, like, as you and I talk, I mean, I can't speak for you. So hopefully this happens in reverse. But I listen to you speak and it immediately inspires some thoughts in my head. We try to keep these conversations as organic as possible. I'm listening to you speak and I think about a couple of things. First of all, it's the idea that you talk about humans are the loop, humans in the loop. Fundamentally, you got to think about what is the purpose of businesses to begin with. Is the fundamental purpose, we have to ask the right questions and they have to be the most basic questions when we have these conversations. Is the purpose of a business, or most businesses, to employ people or to make money? And depending on your answer, it changes your whole frame around this. Now, the other way that you change your frame on this is whether or not you work at a large company, or let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're self-employed. If you're self-employed running your own business, obviously you're not looking to disintermediate or displace yourself. But a large company, I mean, you could argue, is the goal really to employ people? Or is it to maximize return to shareholders? And if it's the latter, then shouldn't we applaud situations where people who are a cost center become redundant and we can do things more efficiently? If you believe in the humanistic side of this, that really people should be employed, that this is part of our economy, then we have backlash, and that happens a lot against companies that lay off people in large numbers in favor of technology. There's a kind of a PR backlash there. And so the system tries to regulate itself. I would argue that like we're at this inflection point now where you have very smart people out there making arguments that I have trouble reconciling in my brain because the economy has not moved to where it needs to accommodate all these things. So let me give an example. I've seen a couple of very smart futurists, people in our field recently, out in the media, talking about how the nature of work is going to change. For example, there are going to be many more people working in a gig economy, a more flexible economy where their job and or jobs might overlap and change over the course of time, be more temporary, be more transient. And of course, in a perfect world, if you're able to maximize that, great. I mean, it has flexibility, it has independence, all that stuff. Unfortunately, one of the biggest issues we now have as a society, certainly here in the United States, is affordability of healthcare. One of the biggest reasons why people work at large companies is even less for the salary and more for the guarantee of benefits like healthcare. And as self-employed business owners, we understand this all too well.
Oh no, we've been feeling it.
So
yeah,
how
we
can
get
you
it.
go out with a message to people saying in the near future, you and your kids are going to be part of this flexible, interesting gig economy and not have immediate answers for how they're going to be able to afford basic things or have any predictability in terms of the cadence of their life? That to me is something like we have to ask these questions now. We have to ask these questions now, not because I foresee a bad future, but because if we're going to prepare for that kind of future, we have to ask the right questions and we have to put the right systems and protocols in place.
Talk about musical chairs. If the seat of the chair is the future of work, then the legs of the chair have to be all of the different social safety nets, including like different definitions of capitalism, right? It's like capitalism isn't going away. We're not calling for that at all. Like that's a pillar of our economy, but like to redistribute a lot of the parts of that. Then it's like the healthcare conversation.
To rethink parts
then
of
it's
it.
the incentives.
Yes.
Then you and I, and like a work context, always talk about the strategic alignment side of it. But it's like, what is actually supporting the base of this chair
Yeah, and
before it's taken away in this game of musical chairs.
And this is certainly not anti-capitalist. I mean, I think about an
No.
interview I saw just a few weeks ago with Elon Musk, you know, the quintessential capitalist. And he was on a panel with Jensen Huang. And again, you always have to take what any of these individuals say with a grain of salt, because there's always self-interest behind a lot of this. But he was basically saying it was this like Star Trek utopian vision of a future. Any of you who are Star Trek nerds know that Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, put forth this idea that in a couple hundred years, we'd have an economy on Earth that money did not exist. And people who worked or had, quote, jobs did so because it was their manifest destiny, or they just did the things they felt they were called to do.
And it was kind of like a barter economy, right? Going back to like the guilds.
Right, barter economy. So very interesting vision for the future. Not necessarily all that unrealistic if we end up that way in the next couple hundred years. But Elon Musk is on a stage, and he's talking about how he could see with the advancement of AI that in maybe like a 20-year time horizon, work will be optional. And people can work, but only if they decide they want to, and they're getting meaning out of their work. And otherwise, there'll be an economy of abundance. And I find that interesting because it sounds great. It's a great sales pitch. However,
also a great sales pitch when you're almost a trillionaire.
Well, and that's the thing. But you're talking about someone who's talking about a system which would have a lot of the characteristics of a quote unquote socialist society as we think of it today. But of course, this is the quintessential capitalist. So the promise of this is that the technology makes everything so easy and abundant that everyone can live very well and very comfortably. But now let's break this down using common sense. How do we get from A to B in, let's say, 20 years, where we get to a system where all of a sudden everyone can just choose whether or not they want to work? And for the people now who are at the top of the economic kind of advantage pyramid, who control most of the wealth, how are they going to feel about a system where all of a sudden there's such abundance that the rewards go to everybody? See, the reason why the system is the way it is today is that the rewards are concentrated in a fairly small group of hands. If you open that up to everybody, the entire economic system has to recalibrate. And I would argue that based on the carrots and sticks of today, the incentives and the rewards, and how much we have tied to capitalism, that's not going to happen in 10 years. It's not going to happen in 20 years. That is a megalithic kind of thing that might take 100 years to change. And I don't know if we have that runway. So the question is, as all of you think about your jobs, what your kids are going to do in the next 10, 20 years, are we going to be in that future that Elon Musk just posited, or are we going to have to think about it very, very differently?
Well, so yes, of course, we have to think about it differently. And I think that, again, this is double pronged. So it's like you're talking about like full, which is so needed, full economic recalibration because of technology. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit.
Let's do it.
Because I think that the other prong of this is also really profound from a kind of deeply personal level. And that is the personal recalibration that has to happen when purpose becomes greater than productivity. And that's a very fundamental human shift, because we are kind of unwiring our brains, so to speak, from like 200 years of industrialized optimization.
Yeah. Preach, sister.
So, do you just call me sister?
Yeah, amen.
Don't ever do that again. So, so again, we were taught to be more machine-like. It was efficiency, it was productivity, and the whole question now, right, of what do you do for a living, or for kids, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah,
like we always expected an answer, and for us as grown-ups, right, like so much of our, like one of the biggest mistakes I think we've made collectively, like as a species, is the fact that labor, value, and purpose all became intertwined.
Yeah.
They're three very separate things.
Absolutely.
So much of our intrinsic value is derived from this, everything that you just laid out. When the whole pyramid becomes inverted, and when we no longer derive purpose. I came across something else recently, and I think it was Daniel Susskind. He said, again, I see all these great LinkedIn posts, and there's a whole book on it, which is The Crisis of Unpurpose.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, the crisis of unpurpose. I love that, because we're going through a massive personal identity crisis. When work is stripped away in its traditional forms, what does that mean to us?
Right.
What does it mean? Like when we go to a holiday party, it's like, what do you do for a living? And you're like, and it's like you're cobbling together 5 different things, a dozen different things. You have like
I
2
feel that-
dozen different identities.
I feel that as a futurist. I have to explain in more detail to
Yes.
half the people we meet what that means. Sometimes I'm jealous of like a doctor. I'm like, I'm a physician. Great. Now I know. And then you
Yeah.
move on. Now it's going to get even more complicated for the majority
But you
of
know
people.
what's interesting? You even say a doctor, and I think about this, right? It's like the sunk cost fallacy. It's like, okay, I just put like 20, 30, 40 years of knowledge and expertise into this. And it's like, it's creating this paradox where it's like, oh my God, do I cling to that even more, even though facets of what I know are 1, becoming obsolete, and 2, going on to technology. But do I sink my claws in even deeper because I'm so afraid of losing this part of my identity? And that's that paradox, right? Of like, okay, how comfortable am I just abandoning all of this? And again, it's like a prior economy rewarded. It was like knowledge is power, clock in, clock out, hierarchies became comfortable, all of these things, right? And then it's like, now, is any of that even going to matter?
Right.
It's not just a flattening of the organization. It's the fact that like, how do you navigate ambiguity?
Yeah.
And how do you measure ambiguity? How do you even have that as a skill set when ultimately, like, again, WTF, like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, how can we like buoy between these 2 realities? And I think so many of us are just stuck in this middle right now that like, great, AI on one end of the spectrum is doing away with redundancies. We know it's doing away with the boring, the mundane, the rote, the bullshit we don't want to do.
Right.
You talked about Excel spreadsheets. Like, I've had people in my audience be like, but I love Excel. And I'm like, great, do you? Like, that's all well and good.
Yeah.
But like, 99% of normal people don't like doing this shit.
Right.
Then on the other end, you're like, but I put my entire being into being X, whatever that is for you. And when the foundation of that begins to shift, I think a lot of what we are starting to feel on a more visceral level is, if I'm not this, who am I? And I think we're going to really see, alongside these economic changes, we're trying to figure out, who am I? What matters to me?
Right, exactly.
And if I'm not my job, what am I?
One of the things that we all bring to the table for what we do, you and I, anyone we know, is our own personal sort of, in some cases, biases, and in other cases, just carefully formed opinions about the world. And I've always felt that if the majority of people have to lead with who I am based on a work perspective as the identifier for what makes you, you, I think it's a sad testament to kind of where we are as a society, because work is a transient thing. You might have, historically, you might have had one career for 40, 50 years and then retired. Now that looks very different. But, and I think one of our goals is to make these modules and this whole platform of ours a little bit personal. So not just talk about things clinically, but you know this as well as I do. We've suffered some personal loss over the last, decade or so. We've lost people close to us, older people. And as you reflect on their life, because you know them really well, or you watch them reflect on their own lives, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here becomes almost insignificant. Now, I'm going to get a little ethereal and spiritual here.
No,
and I'm not typically the most spiritual guy in a conventional sense. But, what I thought was important when I was a teenager, or when I was in my early 20s, is different than now, because my perspective has shifted watching people in the last stages of their life. It's like, how productive they were at a certain thing, or how much they hustled doing X, or what their job was, why. That stuff becomes deprioritized when it comes to taking stock of one's life, one's existence, one's family, and the real impact one had. And so I think about that now, and I'm like, if we move away from a world where you lead in conversations with, I am X, this is my job, whatever that job may be, to I am Y. This is who I am. And oh, by the way, I sometimes do this, or historically I did this. I think reframing that is really interesting. Now, we've talked at a very high level so far in this conversation, and there's only so much we can cover in 40 to 45 minutes. I feel like we're doing everyone a disservice, because we're going to cut this off soon. and there's so many more tentacles, and we're going to cover a lot of them in the future. But we always like to bring this back to the kind of common sense, the family, the kitchen table. So think about this. For any of you that have kids and you're talking to your kids just as, you know, one-on-one, what is your future going to look like? What are you going to train for, your future job, your future career? I think changing this mindset into who do you want to be, not what do you want to do, it sounds so simple, but I think it's a fundamental shift.
I love that reframing.
Because I also think, and then I'll shut up. I think if you do that, it also helps address some of the other intractable problems that we have on an interim basis. One of which, and you know I rail against this a lot, is the promotion of hustle culture. Is the idea that in a world where we are inventing technology effectively to try to make things more efficient for us, that there are people out there, by the millions, by the way, who are promoting that the only way to be is to hustle even more and to grind those gears even harder and burn yourself out even faster. I don't understand that mentality in a world where things are supposedly getting easier and more efficient for us. So we have to reconcile those two things, and I think we're coming up to a point of reckoning.
Well, that's the kind of personal recalibration that has to happen, right? That's the deprogramming that like we individually have to put ourselves through.
Right.
And then I think it's great. Like we have to reframe those questions. You're absolutely right. It's like, instead of saying like, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's like, it's who, what matters to you, using your imagination. It's like how to water those seeds. And it sounds so cheesy to be like, it's a garden, but it is, right? It's like how to nurture it, how to say like, you're going to be multiple people across the course of your lifetime. You're going to have multiple jobs that you're not even going to view as jobs, because it's going to just be about facets of yourself. And to just come to terms with the fact that like, it's not going to be this linear progression. It hasn't been in years, and we know that. But it's like to get to a place culturally where there is as much emphasis on thinking as today, it's like hours worked. Where I think a lot of people are like, okay, so, and this is part of that internal struggle, right? And I see it with people I know, where it's like, great, let's say traditional 40-hour work week. Okay, if 20 of those hours, you know, in a great case scenario can be done by AI, I presumably then have a 20-hour work week. What if like productivity in this new world is just measured by idle time? And the idle time is thinking. It's imagination. It's connecting the dots. It is experimentation. It's play. It's wonder. It's these, and it's like, we can't get there yet. And even for our kids, it's like, oh, too much idle time, like schedule them or do this, or, you know, you need to have some sort of idea as to where you're going or what you're doing. And it's like, we almost need to just like, as a planet, just like take a breath in, and the exhale is all of this shit that doesn't serve us anymore.
I agree. And I mean, I think, so you're talking about kind of reframing our perspective on that. And that goes two ways, because we also, like, for those of us who work for other people, the people we work for have to reframe their expectations and perspective on that. So I always say, I love the way you put that, that we have a certain pie chart of our brain, like the amount of time or the amount of energy we spend doing certain things. Wouldn't it be great if we could flip it and the majority of that pie chart is spent on things that we find rewarding, that give us purpose and meaning, that we enjoy doing, instead of stuff that we resent doing? Same thing applies to work. What amount of time are we working on things that we don't necessarily need to be doing, that we resent doing? But here's the problem. There is this blurry, this kind of fog between where we're starting and where we need to go. Where we're starting is we're still spending a lot of time doing stuff we don't particularly like. Now, in theory, if we could figure out a way to do what we need to do in half the time and be that much more efficient, that should be rewarded. Unfortunately, I think the paradigm today is that we either self-impose, like, nope, now we have 20 hours of downtime, we have to fill that by working more, doing other things, or our employer says, nope, sorry, I understand that you're being more efficient, but now that frees up more time for us to give you other things to do. There is this constant treadmill. It's like a hamster on a wheel. We have to break out of that and say, listen, if you can do the same amount of work at the same quality in 4 hours that it currently takes you 40, Does that mean you should be replaced? Does that mean you should be rewarded? Or is it some combination of the two? That's where we're at right now. When you think about your skills, it's so interesting to think about this. I really admire people, and this goes both ways. I admire people, and it's more often you see people who come out of the knowledge economy who get burnt out. And then they figure out, you know what, I'm not gonna go that same trajectory anymore. I'm gonna take the skills I've cultivated and go do something else that I really enjoy or that is passion for me. Like leave the financial world and go into wellness. Do something more holistic, like become a yoga practitioner. Leave the financial world, and if I have the financial wherewithal, maybe buy a little winery or something like that. We see that all the time. I think of Peter Gibbons from Office Space, one of my favorite movies.
That's the best movie ever.
We make Office Space references all the time. He burnt out, and he was very happy at the end of the movie doing construction and cleanup. And so
he had a case of the Mondays.
So he had a case of the Mondays, and that turned into his life, and he found something more rewarding. And it can go the other way. So the thing is, like, people can always be in a position to pivot. So I think that there are certain skills that we have to train ourselves to develop. And here's the thing. It's not easy to measure these things. That's one of the reasons why there isn't enough talk about this today. We are living in a world that is increasingly measured, self-quantified, and algorithmic. People are not comfortable playing in a sandbox where the boundaries are not clear. When you want to quantify, let's say,
well, that's why I always
creativity,
say, like, we're going from
passion,
measurable
purpose,
input and output to immeasurable wisdom.
And most people in a world where we're trying
easy
to drive towards algorithms and quantification are not comfortable being like, how do I measure purpose, passion, humanity, creativity, innovation? We've talked for a long time about the fact that the future is very much going to be about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Throw in the A for STEAM. But in reality, rising up alongside of that is going to be whether or not people pay for college. It's irrelevant. The value of things that were traditionally considered softer, like the humanities or the social sciences, when we think about philosophy and ethics, the philosophy and ethics around the use of technology, there is going to be a resurgence on human-centric or human-centered skills and competencies. We're just scratching the surface of that now, and I don't think enough people out there who are really the ones who are able to move the needle on this thinking are talking enough about it. So the last thing I want to say on this is you go onto LinkedIn, a platform where many of you are gonna find our content. It shocks me how so many people, just 1 to 2 years into this AI journey of ours, are putting in their byline in the description of who they are and what they do that they're AI experts. It's like you were saying. It's become this commoditized, AI-driven, AI-fueled. It's marketing gobbledygook. It's like it's throwing it on there.
It's like a decade ago when everyone said they were doing social media.
Well, yeah.
Like, I'm a social media.
But it's like saying something is organic or saying something is artisanal. It's like at a certain point, it's like enough with this crap already. I know, artisanal, great. It's just cheese.
Bespoke.
Bespoke. Now it's a very different thing, but now everyone's putting AI in there because it's almost like basic cost of doing business. Look at me, everybody. I'm an AI expert. I got news for you. No, you're not. If there are 100 of you seeing this right now that market yourselves as AI experts, I would guarantee that maybe 2 to 3 of you actually are. The rest of you just want to be able to market like, look at me, I'm relevant.
It's an expert in what? What facet of it? It's like, it's such a catch-all.
And the counterpoint to that is in the future, I think one of the cool things, whether you're on LinkedIn or anywhere else, is not to say that you're an expert in AI, but to basically start to qualify those human skills. What makes you? I am truly passionate and purpose driven, and here's the example of why. I can critically think, and here are examples of how I've done so even in the face of all of this technology. To be able to kind of put metrics around that, or at least communicate that, will be so valuable to both adults and kids alike.
It's such a monumental look inward. And again, it is dwelling in the discomfort. And that in and of itself, the practice of that is deeply uncomfortable.
The practice of discomfort
is a lot.
Yeah.
It's very unsettling.
Yeah.
To
I love that.
Almost everybody. And, you know, it's like one of the biggest skill sets is being able to also dwell in uncertainty. And I had someone in my audience recently who asked me a very pointed question right after I had said that the jobs that are going to be created, the jobs of tomorrow, are ones that we have even yet to be able to imagine today. So she's like, what are those jobs? And I'm like, girl, like, did you not just hear everything that I just said? We have no idea. You are uncomfortable dealing with the uncertainty of not knowing.
Right.
And again, like that's a very uncomfortable place to be in. But the more that we can teach our children to just kind of be more comfortable in that uncertainty. And remember years ago, we still reference this term because I still like to geek out on it and I love it, by David Pierce Snyder, about complexopacity.
Yeah.
And I still love that term. And basically it's our capacity for dealing with complexity, knowing, right, that like complexity is only snowballing.
Yep.
And how capable are we as individuals and then collectively in actually dealing with it, dwelling in it, knowing that it's going to be a part of our everyday, and not going back to what I said before about sinking in our claws with like this sunk cost fallacy.
That's right.
Right? It's like clinging to all of these outdated ways of thinking, working, analyzing, being, like the laundry list goes on and on.
If you tether yourself to the Titanic, eventually the ship is going down. And I think we're at this inflection point as a society right now where individual people have to, and there's another theme that we have an episode on, pilot versus passenger.
Yeah.
There's stuff happening in the macro environment, economically, politically, and with technology that we can't control. So the fact is, we have to accept those things for what they are, but we have a lot of agency over our own decisions. So how do we reframe our own thinking, and how do we help our kids reframe their thinking as we move into this future? And I think as we wrap up this conversation, again, the visual is musical chairs. Not meant to scare people, but it's the idea that we might have a slow burn. It's tough to identify the pace of this. And it's going to be different depending on industry, depending on what people do for work. But it's not like all 20 chairs in the room are going to stay, and it's not like the 20 are going to go to 1 tomorrow. But over time, we have to get used to the fact that one of two things will likely happen, maybe both. We're going to go to 19 chairs, and then we're going to go to 18 chairs, and then 17 chairs. And what I see now is that people are just comfortable trying to do the status quo until their chair gets pulled. And in many ways, I think people who are already 1 or 2 generations into the workforce and into their careers are trying to run out the clock. They're like, well, if I just keep my head down long enough, I'll be good until retirement. Very wishful thinking. So at some point, you have to think about, when are those chairs going to get pulled? Now, is that chair going to get pulled and put into a different room? That's another way to think about this. So it's not going to exist in the room you think of, but maybe there's an entirely new space that's going to open up, to your point about careers and jobs that don't exist yet. Look, how long ago was it that no one was talking about being a coder? Then there came the period where everyone was pressured to tell their kids, if they had the ability to go to school or even train themselves, become a coder. And now we're looking at a future where I would argue that 80 to 90% of coders and developers are going to be redundant or irrelevant in a future of large language model-based artificial intelligence. So then it becomes like, now we have to think about new things. This has always been the case, but it's on steroids and it's exponential right now. So the bottom line is we have these conversations as individual people, as we think about ourselves and our own mental bandwidth, as we talk to our kids about these things, we have to not only start thinking common sense about where is the future actually headed? How do I best prepare myself? How do I prepare my kids? Understanding their economic realities, like how are we going to pay for basic necessities like health insurance? But also, like, where do we want to be? Let's see if we can set a goal and then reverse engineer from there. Like, where do we want to be as far as like purpose, passion, all the things you talked about?
And again, and we say it almost every episode, asking the questions that the future is going to require.
Absolutely.
So as always, like, subscribe. Thank you for joining today's episode. This is going to be the first of many on this topic. I feel like we only skimmed the surface.
Let's wake the future together. See you guys soon.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, like, follow, and subscribe to stay ahead of what's next. I'm Erica Orange.
And I'm Jared Weiner. Thanks for waking the future with us. We'll see you next time.